Welcome to the 2020 Plural Positivity World Conference and the Spiritual Lenses of Plurality panel. Thank you for tuning in. We are the Crisses, plural activists, life coach, author, and podcaster, and we're the panel moderators today. We are a plural-identified group entity, DID diagnosed, covert most of the time, polyfragmented modular quadgenic system. That means it's complicated. Because even though we have CPTSD due to very early childhood trauma, we also believe strongly and have no evidence otherwise that we were bound to be plural anyway. Our father could have been diagnosed, showing all the classic symptoms of DID, but when we were 17, he self-described himself as having gifts and said his mother was a bruja in Argentina, and he got scared and suppressed his gifts. But he could see that we had the gifts too, and that he gave us his blessing. That was a very mixed up moment because we had been channeling spirits since childhood. A headcount that would have been a dozen or so adaptive children was instead a potential cast of hundreds because those children flagged us spirits, or we joke around and say ghosts sometimes, down for help. We say potential because when we moved in, Marissa, now one of our protectors, turned around and slammed the door shut in the face of many, locking them out. We sidestepped the online DID community for many years, instead trailblazing on our own and collecting a bunch of folk who were both otherkin and plural, and those repulsed by gatekeeping and petty arguments. And together this band of adventurers helped turn our website into kinhost.org, an online wiki that's inclusive of all types of plurality and gives a great deal of support to those who need it. Many conversations and topics included medicalized information being studied side by side with spiritual and self-help materials. And often we compared notes and created our own resources. While that group isn't active, the resources that they helped us build still stand as one of the largest collective plural resources on the internet that does not discriminate against any origins. And it's a wiki. If you're disappointed that something's missing, we accept contributions and will give a password to trusted contributors. Why are we telling all y'all this? Because this is the Spiritual Lenses of Plurality panel, a topic near and dear to our heart. Even though a wide variety of cultural understandings and non-pathologized plurality are protected in the DSM-5, many systems oppress and attack spiritual systems, and even therapists don't seem to have read the discussion portion of the DSM that talks about not pathologizing plurality under certain circumstances, including when there's a cultural framework around it. In addition, even though science may demand objective observation, that does not account for personal and subjective experiences of the world that are entirely valid. Many systems may frame their plurality in several different ways, recognizing that spirituality is a valid dimension of human experience and that not all of a person's needs are purely physical, scientific, or observable. It's important to note that science, as yet, cannot observe consciousness, that brain activity alone does not account for all of human experience, and that people are far more complicated than science currently understands. With that said, we'd like to take a moment for the panel to introduce themselves. Panelists, please let everyone know who you are and an overview of what spiritual practices you or others in your plural system practice.
Hi, so the name of the body is Serenity, Serseción. We're plural and a psychologist. A summary of our spiritual practices is kind of complicated. I guess the briefest way that we would explain it would be mysticism, and we're part of a Buddhist sangha locally.
Hello, my name is Shawn, pronouns she, her, hers, and I am a member of Nsashaell system, a plural group of around 30 individuals with a wide variety of religious affiliations and non-affiliations. We tend to divide our system into 3 broad categories: atheists, agnostics, and spiritual people, and the groups are fairly even in number. I am a member of our spiritual group, so I will be talking about our spiritual practices, which combine elements of earth-based religions, Buddhism, paganism, and New Age practices.
Pick one of your spiritual lenses and give a very brief overview as to what attracts you to using that spiritual lens.
Our spirituality is very tied to how the inside of our head works, and we use it to do practical and useful alterations to our internal workings, to heal internal damage, and to help our members to achieve a sense of purpose, peace, and connection to the earth. This practicality is likely why we have borrowed many ideas from different frameworks, instead of gravitating towards one that was already fully constructed. Much of our practices revolve around dreams, visualization, and internal imagery, because we naturally have a vibrant visual internal landscape. Also, nature and our relationship with the land is centered in our spirituality because we have always felt a deep connection with being outside.
So for mysticism, which is kind of complicated to explain, I guess the easiest way to explain it would be that it is kind of a combination of other types of spirituality, but it's also not. I guess it's not the best explanation. A lot of people who practice mysticism feel like their focus is to find whatever the truth is for them. So not this idea of whatever you find is applicable to everyone else, but more what is your spiritual truth individually, and also being accepting of other people's spiritual and religious beliefs. I'd say that's the basics of it. But for us, what that includes is a lot of different types of religions and spirituality. It includes Christianity because the country that we're from is very Christian and Catholic, so that was a really big part of our upbringing. And then it also includes a lot of folk healing practices from where we're from, which is from Puerto Rico. So that includes things like espiritismo, santeria, some stuff from our indigenous background, which is Taino, and kind of like a hodgepodge of all of those things. I would say would be our type of mysticism.
Describe what plurality is according to your preferred spiritual lens.
So if we're going through mysticism, what would that be? Honestly, it could be so many things. So some of the stuff that we heard when we were younger were things like being possessed, and it didn't necessarily have to be negative. So I think that's the difference. There was this idea of kind of like demon possession being one of the reasons why someone might be plural, but not always. So it could also be a more positive spirit, like an angel or something like that. Other people who were shamans or mediums talked about being possessed as well. But those would be a little bit closer to maybe what people think of like a walk-in, if people know that term, or other kin, where there's like an entity that comes from outside that becomes part of the system. So there's that. And even if it happened, even if someone had been a system when they were young, I think the assumption was, oh, well, that might have happened when this person was a baby or a child, at least in some spiritual practices. So it really varied. I feel like in some cases it could be something negative and that you had to get rid of it, basically. And in others it was like, oh, this is a sign that this person has stronger spiritual power because they're able to connect to spirits and whatnot. So it really varied. Like we said earlier, so we're also part of a Buddhist Sangha locally, which is a little bit different. It's also a Japanese Buddhist Sangha specifically, and we are not Japanese. So in that one, it's a bit different. One, because we're not a part of the community in the sense that we're not Japanese. We weren't raised in the temple, but it is a group that we participate in now, if that makes sense. I have never heard any talk about being plural or anything similar to that, at least not yet. So I don't know if my sense is that not that it doesn't exist as much as we might just not be aware of what that idea would be.
According to the spiritual faction in our system, we are spirits that have become anchored or tied down into this body. Some of us were anchored here at birth, while others arrived later in life, through dreams, summoning, or creation by other members. Some believe they were reincarnated and have past life memories, while others believe this is their first life. We also believe that we were meant to be together here, and that there is nothing that differentiates each of us from a singlet spirit aside from the fact that there are more than one of us in the same body.
How does your spirituality affect your daily life as a group or individuals?
We have allotted fronting time for each of us, and so what we practice that day will depend heavily on who is out. Some may read cards, take walks outside, or visit the ocean or rivers to give offerings of rocks or dried herbs. Others won't think about spirituality at all during their fronting time. We do all come together on holidays. We celebrate the equinoxes and solstices by setting out offerings, reading cards, and for the non-spiritual people, reflecting and connecting with significant people in our life.
That's a little complicated too. So most people in the system have the same spiritual practice at this point. Let's say 99.9%. One person who is out very often and is around right now, because anyway, does not follow all of the spiritual practices the way that everyone else does, but that's okay. How does that affect? So our spirituality, I'm just going to talk about the rest of us, and then I'll talk about a little bit about that one person. So for us, it affects us daily. I mean, things that we have in our office, which is where we are right now, at home, all connected to our spirituality. Like there's a lot of, like there are altars and incense and candles and just a lot of things that are connected to ritual, connected to our spirituality. I'm trying to think. I was trying to think if we could turn the camera on, but it's on the screen, so probably not. But so even in our office right now, someone who came in might not notice this stuff as much unless they were in the same type of spiritual practice as us. But like, so next to our chair where we see clients, we have like a quartz crystal, and we have things for scent, and we have basically an altar next to where we sit. But I don't think that many clients know that that's what it is. And so we always have things like that just around us all the time. So I feel like our spirituality is in our daily lives 24/7. Most of us, that's how we guide what we do, say, how we act, pretty much all the time. So it's an extremely important part of our life. On the flip side, we don't talk about it very much, which may be interesting, because ever since we moved to the States, and especially being a psychologist, the amount of stigma that we've seen towards being spiritual, having a spiritual practice, seems to be pretty high and different to what we're used to. So we tend to just not talk about it as much with people, unless we trust them or we know that they're in a similar practice or something like that. But if not, then it doesn't come up. And so, like I said before, so one person in our system doesn't practice the same type of spirituality as us, but they still have similar beliefs. Let's say they're a bit more skeptical than the rest of us. I would be the nicest way to put it. And the way that comes up is mostly in diet. So we don't eat pork. And at this point, and it's because of our spiritual practice, at this point, almost everybody does not do that. There was a time where it was a little bit more 50-50. And then it got to the point where no one does, except for that one person, which is okay. So we've tried to figure out how to manage that, because a lot of people think we're a singlet, and so we can't go around being like, oh, we can't eat pork because of our religious practice. Oh, but wait, today I'm going to. Plus the fact that it really would bother the rest of us if that was a part of our regular diet. Anyway, not getting too far into that, but basically what happens is that one person eats pork sometimes, pretty rarely. I would say about once a year, if they want to eat something, there's like one thing that they like, they can, and it's fine. But it either has to be when we were alone or with people who know we're plural, because we don't want to have that dynamic of people not understanding that. Also, at this point, since we don't eat it at all, except for once a year, it does make us sick. So just in that sense too. So I think those are the biggest ways that our spiritual practice affects us. It's one of those things that it's so consistent that it's a little hard to explain how often it comes into our life, because I feel like it's just always kind of there. So that's the best way that I can describe it.
What tools does your spiritual lens offer for working within plurality or DID?
I remember thinking about this question. It was like, for us or for other people? um, and I say that because sometimes when we're teaching people about DID or being plural, we talk a little bit about the spiritual side of it and how that could come up for people. So sometimes we talk a little bit about walk-ins or other kin and things like that, which don't have to be plural, but there's a lot of overlap in both communities. And so it's pretty interesting. So there's this one university that we've been teaching at for a while that has more of a spiritual basis, not the main place that we've taught at. And when we've talked with therapists there, they're a lot more open to that. I think because it's a transpersonal school, and so just by nature, there's a lot of overlap between talking about spirituality and psychology. Like it's not taboo to talk about that. And people there seem to understand being plural better, which we thought was interesting. And it almost seemed to be like, because they could understand, well, there might be like different souls in one body. Like they didn't seem very fazed by that. Or maybe this is related to reincarnation or some sort of like spiritual practice or something like that. Because many of them had a spiritual practice, like they maybe were doing spiritual healing, or maybe they were mediums. And so a lot of them had a spiritual practice in addition to being counselors. So like these two separate sides of these clinicians. So anyway, that was an interesting experience for us because we were surprised how much more open they were to that. And I think that's why. For us, I think maybe it did make it a little bit easier for us to understand being plural, because it just seemed to be more accepted. I feel like in a sense we were lucky because where we grew up, there was less of an idea that being plural didn't exist. There was still stigma, but I don't feel like there was as much of this isn't a real thing that happens. It felt more like, yes, this happens, and sometimes we're scared of it, which is also not great. But because there was that idea that there are so many spiritual reasons why you could be plural, I think that was helpful for us to maybe not be in denial about ourselves, just because we didn't have a long period of denial of being plural, if any. And I do wonder if in part that was because of the world around us being accepting in its own way. And so besides that, our spiritual practices, I feel like they help us get along better, just because since now a lot of us have very similar spiritual practices, and even those that don't, our values are very similar, so we get along well. Like there isn't a lot of conflict on big things, because usually we agree or we can compromise. So I think that's how it's been helpful.
We use dreamwalking when asleep to heal trauma and fix internal damage. We sometimes visit other places in our dreams in order to ask for assistance from other spirits, or induce a trance state to do the same. When awake, we form and maintain relationships with nature spirits and spirit-inhabited objects for protection and luck. We also read cards for advice and to gain other perspectives on problems. We consider our cards to be spirit-inhabited as well.
Can you describe your spiritual lens's view of trauma and trauma recovery, if any?
We view our system's trauma in terms of damage to our internal landscape, which is mostly accessible when asleep or in a trance state, and which underlies our normal mental processes when we are awake. In other words, it is damage to an underlayer of our minds that is shared by all of us and connected not only with our body, but with other planes of existence as well. Trauma consists of holes or pockets of negativity and painful emotions and memories, and these can be ancestral in addition to related to our current life. Trauma healing consists of opening and clearing pockets, much like one would clean a wound.
For some reason, the first one that came to mind is how sometimes we had mentioned demon possession. So sometimes in the Christian or Catholic experiences that we had growing up, that was a very real thing that could happen. And so the closest I could think of is that an exorcism or something of the like could be a way to resolve trauma. It's probably the closest. I don't know that there's any like guide of how to resolve trauma through our spiritual practices that I can think of off the top of my head. I will say that for us, it is helpful to have a really solid spiritual practice and belief system to manage our own experiences of trauma and the things that we've experienced in our own life. I think that's been really helpful because even when we were younger and in a very difficult situation, the fact that our spiritual beliefs were so strong at that point and different from our parents and the people who were not great to us, let's say, that I think that gave us some sort of stability. I want to say, I don't know, because we didn't really have someone who was supporting us directly. So I think outside of the system anyway. So I feel like having this kind of like spiritual base and having these certain values helped us feel better, more centered. I think that's what was helpful for us. But yeah, there really isn't anything that I can think of that except what we mentioned of like healing or how to manage it or anything like that. Because unfortunately, a lot of times spiritual practices are used to harm other people, and that's something that's very common as well, and that we saw a lot. So I think all that gets kind of muddled, which is why I feel that for us it's been better that our own spiritual practices are helpful for us individually. But I don't know that there's like some way that it would help, like, or there'd be some rule.
Where has this lens fallen short? What needs do you have that this lens does not meet for you?
I guess if anything, probably what we were just talking about, but at the same time, as in, there's no, if you experience trauma, this would help. There's nothing like that that I know of. At the same time, I am okay with that. I feel like for us, it's been better just to have the spiritual practice itself. I don't feel that my spiritual practice falls short, actually, but I think that's because it's what we've chosen. So even though, like, for example, there's a lot of issues with Christianity and Catholicism in that many sects don't really accept being queer, right? But since we don't um, go to a church or have like a congregation and we more follow mysticism, the stuff that we agree with in Christianity is, I don't know, let's say more like core values rather than dogma overall. And so it doesn't really fall short because we don't relate to the things that maybe would. And then for the group that we're here, it's more that I don't feel that. So I mean, like the Buddhist Sangha that we're in, I don't feel like that encompasses our entire spirituality. So it does fall short, but at the same time, it kind of doesn't matter in the sense that we have our own spirituality outside of that. Like I do wish they had things that they didn't. So for example, it's a very practical spirituality. I don't know how else we can explain it. And the one that we're in has, at least officially, doesn't really believe in like reincarnation or spirits or ghosts or a lot of things that we actually believe in. It's very pragmatic. It's very we're trying to be better people. We're trying to not be attached. It's very much that type of Buddhism. Um, yeah. So for us, that doesn't work, and there's some other things that don't either. But again, we have our own base spirituality, which is not that. It's something different, and that gives us a lot. I feel like the sangha that we're in more gives us a base to go back to. It feels very comforting to go like to the temple for services and things like that. Um, like chanting is something that we find really helpful. Like it's nice to have a community because unfortunately, if you practice mysticism, it's pretty solitary most of the time, and so that's something we were really missing. And the group that we're in, we actually, one of the things that we enjoy about it is that it's more pragmatic because that's kind of what we were looking for, and very accepting of like people who are queer and trans and all that. Like there's still some issues in that people don't understand the LGBTQ community, but that's different than having rules that say something against the LGBTQ community. Like they're making an effort to change that, which is great. So I guess there are some ways in which things fall short. I don't feel like they affect us as strongly because it's a little bit different in the way that we're practicing.
I think it would be validating to come across a named, single framework that fits our viewpoint, but we do not have one.
How have your spiritual beliefs affected your internal relationships, whether positive or negative?
Our system members have very diverse viewpoints, ranging from scientific atheism to unique flavors of agnosticism, to blends of the spiritual frameworks I mentioned earlier. This has, in the past, caused enormous amounts of conflict, with members trying to suppress or devalue the viewpoints of others and prevent them or force them to engage in spiritual activities. When we fully accepted our plurality around 9 years ago, an agreement was reached that we allow people to practice or not practice according to their own inclination and not interfere in each other's business. Since then, we live much more peacefully.
I think overall it's been positive for us because like we were talking about, especially having a core set of values is really helpful. And the more that everyone kind of understood that and kind of, I don't know, agreed on that point, we've had a lot less internal fights because we're all kind of coming from the same place. I mean, we still have arguments, of course, because it's hard not to, but it more seems like just, I don't know, healthy arguments, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, we might not agree on something, but the core values are all the same. So it's pretty easy to go back to that when we're talking to each other. And we've been trying to do things like, even though there's some things that need to happen, I guess, like being kind to people or things like that, you know what I mean? Like basically sticking to the core values. If somebody wants to do something different with some other things that we practice, that's okay. Which is why the one person who still eats pork, we're not going to stop them because that would be, we don't want to impose our belief on someone else. I mean, it does make things a little complicated sometimes, but at the same time, not really. I think just because we're coming from that point of understanding each other well. So I would say that our spiritual practice has helped us grow together a lot because that was the way that many of us were able to really connect to each other and understand each other, was through that.
How comfortable are you being out externally about your spiritual beliefs or practices? For example, have you experienced positive support, oppression, or attacks from members of the plural or DID community due to your spiritual beliefs or practices?
That is a very complicated question, and it's hard to answer all of it briefly. I guess we did mention earlier that we feel like we've had more stigma about having a spiritual practice here in the United States, for sure. It's a very, at least where we've always been on one coast or the other, just to be clear. And it seems very secular, very focused on not having a spiritual practice or a religious practice, and those things are considered to be, I don't know, like something that you shouldn't do. Like, like intelligent people wouldn't believe in anything, or regular people wouldn't believe in this. I don't know. There's like this very strong stigma that let's only follow science and that's it, nothing else. And then psychology is similar. So except for transpersonal psychology, which is different. And thankfully there are some here, but then other psychologists don't take them seriously for the same reason. So we've seen a lot of that. But where we lived, on the other hand, everyone should have a spiritual practice. And if you don't, that is a problem. But also you have to have the right type of spiritual practice. And so there, the issue was more, well, you're not Christian enough, which is true. I mean, we're not, nor do we want to be. And us having different beliefs was considered extremely problematic because there was this split where it's like, either you're Christian or Catholic, or you're like satanic or something like that. And it's a very strong belief. Like, for us to explain how strong that is, I feel like it would take us like hours. But just to understand that it is a very strong belief and value. So we had a lot of pushback about that. And like we mentioned before, being plural, some people believe it is from the same place, and so you also have that stigma. So that becomes very complicated. And then in groups online, we don't really bring it up at all. Maybe if tulpas were accepted in the group, we probably would, just because that seems a little bit. That's not our experience, but it just seems like if the group is accepting of that community, maybe they'd be more accepting of spirituality in general, just because there seems to be at least some connection with those. Or if there were more otherkin and walk-ins, maybe, but even that doesn't really guarantee that they'd be open. So overall, we don't talk about our spiritual practices, because I think it's very personal, and I don't really want to deal with educating people or the stigma that comes with it. Yeah, I think especially in DID spaces where I feel it the most, as in like specifically for DSM, DID, let's only stick to the DSM and science. It's the same type of mentality that's like, we shouldn't be talking about all this other stuff. So I guess to make a long story short, there's stigma everywhere. We don't talk about it very much for that reason.
Having members who are so diverse in beliefs has led us to attempt to referee for systems on either side of the spiritual debate in the past. This mostly led to us winding up in the middle of fights online and making enemies of all kinds. We stay out of such conversations now. In our offline life, we occasionally use the vague word pagan, but largely keep to ourselves about our spiritual beliefs due to not wanting to explain our plurality in most contexts.
What are your two best pieces of advice for other spiritual systems or systems questioning whether they have spiritual origins?
Don't be afraid to combine different aspects of different spiritual lenses. Customize a practice based on what already resonates with you or helps you. You don't have to find a prepackaged set of beliefs. Also, allow different system members to have different worldviews. You don't have to agree in order to have mutual respect.
If it's specifically about spiritual origins, honestly, I think what we'd recommend is to find other groups that are similar and probably stay away from a lot of the communities that are either against or neutral. Just because if you're trying to figure out if there's a spiritual origin in someone in the system, I think that would be really difficult if you're in a community where people are actively telling you that there's something wrong with that or that's not real or something like that. Like you're going to have enough stuff to figure out without having all these people kind of putting all their insecurities and stress on you. So we'd recommend finding communities that are open and accepting, people who you can talk to who have been through the same experience, because you want to have somebody who at least understands that or is accepting, so you all can figure out if that's the case for you or not. And the most important thing is that it's a perfectly valid origin. I say we say that because it kind of gets thrown around a lot that it can't be, or there's like this whole like systems faking type of thing, which is also ridiculous. And so it can be really toxic. So we think that the best thing would be to avoid all those people and find communities that are actually supportive and can help you all figure out what's going on for you.
What are good resources to find out more about your chosen lenses?
For mysticism, none. There's very little written. The few people we've met who follow a similar spirituality to us, it always seems to be very like hush hush. People talk about it to each other, maybe, or people talk about it with experience so far. So probably nothing that we can think of. It rarely shows up anywhere. Sorry. For the other one, that's pretty easy. So the one that we follow is Jolo Shinshu, which is a Japanese Buddhist sect. That's the one that we're in. A lot of people, well, a decent amount of people in Japan practice it, and then also Japanese Americans in the States. Obviously, you don't have to be Japanese American to join, but it is important to know that that is really a big part of that faith. So I feel like if you so you can, there's a lot of information in English. It's just that if you get connected to this community, we think it's important to just understand that it's coming from a framework of people who immigrated from Japan quite a while ago, and then Japanese Americans today, to get an understanding of that and be respectful of it, especially if you're not Japanese. So I know that for us, what that means is just being in more of a learning mindset, if that makes sense, because there are a lot of things that are helpful for us, but at the same time, we're not going to understand the full connotation or context of something, because I don't think we can. I think even people who are in that group, it's hard to understand. So, and there's plenty of other sects anyway. If you're interested in Buddhism, there are so many that you can look at. I think what's important is to be respectful of the origin of that, because so many of them are from different countries, and if you don't have a background from the same country, just being understanding of that and not going in and imposing your own view. But you can find a lot of information online. It's not hard to do.
Your intuition is your best resource.
We would like to offer our panelists an opportunity to give any final remarks, such as anything they are itching to tell the audience, or just to say farewell.
Thank you for having us.
I feel like we want to say something cooler, but I can't think of what that would be. So, I don't know. The only thing that comes to mind for us is try to be open about your own spirituality, at least with yourselves. It can be hard to be open with other people and to figure things out, but it can be a very important part of your life and the life of everybody in the system, or not, depends. But if it is, I think it's helpful to be able to explore that openly and to have support. So I guess going back to our previous point, if you can find some sort of support system, that's great. If not, then maybe that can happen internally, and just figuring out what works for you. Like, it doesn't have to be the religion that you grew up with necessarily, or if you didn't grow up with any religion at all, too. And going back to the system members that might have a spiritual origin, we just think it's really important to remember that is definitely possible. And if that's your experience, then that's what it is. You don't need to prove yourself to anybody else, or I don't know, because there's so many people who I feel like try to call that out in some sort of way, which is really unfortunate. Besides that, I'll just say that again, that for us, our spiritual belief really helped us quite a bit in communication, being closer to each other, understanding each other better, and having a lot of things in our daily life which are important, and then just having those values that we all agree on, even though the practice itself might be a little bit different based on each person, right? And that's okay. No one's trying to impose their spirituality on somebody else either. So that would be it. Hopefully this was helpful for you all. It's not something that's talked about very often, so we're very grateful to have the opportunity to talk about this, thanks to the moderators, and to everybody else on the panel. We're looking forward to seeing their responses as well.
Thank you for attending our panel, and we look forward to your comments. And if you liked this, don't forget to subscribe, click the bell for notifications, and hit the thumbs up to vote for the session. We're the Crisses, and this has been the Spiritual Lenses of Plurality panel for the 2020 Plural Positivity World Conference. Goodbye, and take great care of yourselves.